This isn't just about steel. This is about the future of the North American alliance. If Canada shifts its loyalty, even slightly, the economic shockwaves could rewrite global trade maps. Oil routes, defense pacts, everyday groceries, all at risk. So ask yourself, what happens if Canada finally decides it no longer needs America? Canada and the United States share the world's longest undefended border. They share history, culture, supply chains, and defense. For decades, the relationship was so stable it seemed unbreakable. But steel, a single commodity, is now threatening to fracture it. Trump's decision to slap unfriendly tariffs on Canadian steel blindsided Ottawa. Canada wasn't China. Canada wasn't Russia. Canada was supposed to be family. Yet the tariffs landed like a punch in the gut. Prime Minister Mark Carney fired back immediately. We won't back down. And Canadians, usually measured and polite, erupted. Boycotts began. American products vanished from store shelves. Restaurants rebranded the Americano coffee as the Canadiano. Even hockey arenas booed the U.S. national anthem. This wasn't just economic protest. This was emotional rebellion. Why did this strike such a nerve? To understand, we need to go back. For more than 50 years, Canada's steel industry has been intertwined with America's. From auto plants in Detroit to skyscrapers in Chicago, Canadian steel has been the quiet backbone of U.S. growth. Tariffs didn't just raise costs, they signaled mistrust. Washington was saying, "We don't trust Canada's steel." That message hit harder than the numbers. In the fallout, swift. Canadian consumers slashed U.S. travel plans. Tourism from Canada to America dropped by staggering double digits. Airlines scrambled, border towns panicked, and U.S. retailers felt the squeeze. Boycotts spread beyond Canada. 5 other countries joined in, targeting American goods in solidarity. But the deeper question emerged. Why would Trump risk alienating his closest ally for a short-term tariff gain?
Here's the logic. Tariffs create political theater. They let leaders appear tough, even when the economic payoff is shaky. Trump framed it as protecting U.S. steelworkers, but in doing so, he overlooked a dangerous contradiction. America's supply chains rely on Canada more than most realize. Consider oil. Canada is the United States' #1 foreign supplier of crude. Billions of dollars of energy flow south every year, keeping gas prices stable. What if Canada shifted even a fraction of that to Asia? The U.S. market would feel the pain instantly. Consider defense. Canada is a NATO ally, a NORAD partner, a neighbor guarding the Arctic frontier. If political trust erodes, cooperation in intelligence and defense could weaken. And with Russia and China eyeing the North, that's not a risk the U.S. can't afford. And consider everyday life. From fresh produce to prescription drugs, supply chains zigzag across the border. A tariff fight doesn't just hurt steelworkers, it hits farmers, truckers, and families buying groceries. Suddenly, the alliance feels fragile. This is why the current standoff matters. It's not about whether American skyscrapers pay a bit more for steel. It's about whether a century-old friendship can survive the politics of betrayal. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Canada isn't powerless. In fact, Canada may have more leverage than Washington expected. Canada may look like the smaller player in this drama. 40 million people versus America's 330 million. A tenth of the population, a fraction of the GDP. But scale isn't everything. Leverage lies in the details. First, trade diversification. For decades, Canada leaned overwhelmingly on America. Nearly 75% of its exports crossed the southern border. But times are changing. Europe has been knocking on Canada's door. Asia too. Trade agreements with the EU, the UK, and Pacific nations give Ottawa real alternatives. If America closes its doors, Canada has places to go.
Second, resources. Canada holds vast reserves of oil, gas, uranium, and critical minerals, the very elements driving the 21st century economy. Washington needs them, Beijing wants them, and Brussels is begging for them. That puts Ottawa in the rare position of being courted by all sides. Tariffs risk pushing Canada into someone else's arms. Third, symbolism. Canada's anger matters because it signals something larger. Allies everywhere are questioning America's reliability. When tariffs hit Canada, European leaders called them the act of an unfriendly nation. Australia chimed in. Mexico took note. If the US can't treat its neighbor with respect, who can it treat with respect? The ripple is trust itself breaking. And here's the danger Washington doesn't want to face. Once trust is gone, even when tariffs are lifted, the scar remains. Look at history. In 1971, Nixon shocked allies by abruptly ending the dollar's gold convertibility. The world adapted, but suspicion of US monetary policy lingered for decades. In 2003, the Iraq War fractured alliances in Europe. Many nations still hesitate before marching in lockstep with Washington. Tariffs on Canada could leave the same lasting bitterness. Meanwhile, inside Canada, the political mood is hardening. Prime Minister Carney's vow, "We won't back down," wasn't just rhetoric. Provincial leaders are already talking about redirecting investment, building new supply chains, and shifting defense cooperation towards Europe. Even symbolic moves like renaming the Americano coffee are meant to remind Americans, you are not untouchable. Now, picture the scenarios. Scenario 1, escalation. The US doubles down, Canada retaliates harder, boycotts deepen. Cross-border travel dries up. Small towns along the border collapse economically. Trucking costs soar. Consumers on both sides feel the sting, from cars to groceries. Scenario 2, quiet retreat. Washington realizes the gamble backfired, quietly rolls back tariffs, and offers concessions. But the damage is already done. Canada begins long-term diversification, never again putting all its trust in one partner.
Scenario 3, realignment. Canada leans into Europe, Asia, and maybe even China. Imagine Canadian oil redirected to Asian ports, uranium shipped to Europe, defense exercises tilted toward NATO and away from NORAD. The map of North American cooperation is permanently redrawn. Which is most likely? The truth lies in between. Tariffs may eventually be lifted, boycotts may fade, but the seed of doubt has been planted, and once planted, it grows. Here's the bigger consequence: global trade stability. If America can't keep its alliances intact, China gains room to maneuver. Beijing has long sought to pull US allies into its orbit with trade and infrastructure deals. A disillusioned Canada, even partially leaning east, would be a symbolic victory for China and a blow to US credibility. And what about everyday Americans? They may shrug at headlines about steel tariffs, but when they see Canadian tourists vanish, when border towns lose business, when groceries creep higher in price, the reality becomes clear. Tariffs don't just punish opponents, they punish neighbors, and sometimes your own people.
Here's the haunting question. Is this just a trade dispute or the opening crack in North America's foundation? Think about it. The United States has always assumed Canada would stand by its side through wars, through recessions, through global crises. But the tariffs proved something dangerous. Loyalty cannot be taken for granted, and once loyalty is tested, it can never be fully restored. So, is Canada ready to say goodbye to America? Not yet. But for the first time in living memory, Canadians are asking themselves if they should. Friendships, like alliances, don't collapse overnight. They erode, bit by bit, through neglect and betrayal. Steel may seem cold metal, but in this story, it carries heat. The heat of mistrust, pride, and national identity. The tariffs may lift tomorrow. The boycotts may fade next year. But the memory of betrayal lingers far longer. And that is the real story. The United States may have won a tariff battle, but in doing so, it risks losing the trust of its closest friend.